The sky rumbled with an ominous growl, thick clouds rolling in like waves, crashing over a silent battlefield. A distant flash of lightning momentarily lit the dense African wilderness, revealing the winding river that cut through the land like a scar. It was no ordinary river tonight. It was an angry, relentless force, swollen by the torrential downpour that had transformed it into a roaring beast. Not far from its dangerous edge, nestled within a small village, an infant lay peacefully, asleep, unaware that fate had already begun to unravel its cruel plan. The baby's mother, fatigued from a long day's labor, had dozed off under the dim flicker of an oil lamp, her arms unconsciously loosening their protective hold around her child. The storm outside was merely a lullaby to her weary soul, but then, crash! A deafening bolt of lightning struck a tree near the village, splitting it in half. The colossal trunk gave way, tumbling toward the fragile hut. The impact sent tremors through the ground, and in that instant, the sleeping baby was jolted awake. A sudden gust of wind blew the hut's door wide open. The baby, wrapped in a thin cloth, was swept up by the fierce wind. In mere moments, the infant tumbled from the safety of the hut, rolling through the muddy earth like a fallen leaf, straight toward the churning abyss of the river. The villagers, already struggling to secure their homes against the violent storm, did not see what had happened. No one heard the infant's muffled cries as the river swallowed its tiny form. No one, except for a pair of golden, unblinking eyes, watching from the shadows. The watchful guardian, deep in the heart of the jungle, a majestic lion named Asani stood, atop a rocky outcrop, his powerful frame silhouetted against the stormy sky. His thick mane, damp from the relentless rain, bristled slightly as he gazed down at the river. To the average onlooker, Asani was just another predator of the wild, a beast to be feared, a king with no compassion. But there was something different about him, something ancient, something almost human. His ears perked up, his powerful nose twitching against the damp air. Then he heard it, a faint, desperate cry, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the thunder, a cry for help. Asani's piercing eyes scanned the churning river below, his gaze locked onto a fragile bundle, half submerged, tossed helplessly by the raging current. A cub? No, too small. Too weak. And then it hit him. It was not a cub. It was a human child. The instinct to hunt was deeply embedded in every lion's soul. But something even stronger surged through Asani's veins in that moment. He did not see prey. He saw life, fragile and fleeting. Fighting against the merciless river, without hesitation, the mighty lion leapt from his perch, his paws barely making a sound against the drenched earth. His muscles rippled beneath his rain-slicked fur as he bolted toward the water's edge, every instinct screaming against what he was about to do, a fight against death itself. The river was unforgiving, a merciless beast that swallowed all who dared challenge it. But Asani was no ordinary challenger. With a powerful roar, he lunged into the water, the impact sending ripples across the surface. The current immediately fought against him, dragging him backward with ruthless force. His powerful limbs kicked against the surge, his claws scraping against submerged rocks as he propelled himself forward. The baby's cries were growing weaker. With a final desperate push, Asani reached the tiny, struggling form. His enormous jaws carefully closed around the infant, not in the lethal grip of a predator, but in the gentle, calculated hold of a mother lion carrying her cub. Then came the hardest part. The return. The river, furious at its lost prize, lashed out with even greater force. The lion's muscles burned as he fought to swim upstream, his powerful chest heaving against the endless pull of the current. A floating log struck his side, forcing a strained growl from his throat, but he did not let go. The baby's body was ice cold. If Asani didn't make it to shore soon, it would be too late. With one final surge of strength, Asani lunged toward the muddy bank, his claws digging deep into the earth. Water poured from his drenched mane as he staggered onto solid ground, his chest rising and falling in exhausted heaves. For a moment he simply stood there, the storm raging around him, the weight of the child still firm but gentle in his jaws, and then the infant moved, a tiny, trembling breath. A faint whimper, the lion's ears flicked forward, his golden eyes watching intently. The baby was alive, but their journey was far from over. What comes next will warm your heart. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating the village in the distance, a place that had no idea its lost child had just been pulled back from the grasp of death. Asani knew that if he left the infant here, the jungle would claim it before morning. He could not allow that. The mighty beast turned toward the village, the child still clutched safely in his jaws. Step by step he moved forward, toward the world of men, a world that had always feared him, a world that may never understand why a lion had just saved a human life. But Asani did not seek understanding. He only sought to do what felt right. And, as the storm raged on, the king of the jungle carried the tiny human toward an uncertain fate, one that neither of them could yet foresee. A village on the edge of the wild. The storm had passed. The once raging river now flowed with a deceptive calm, as if it had not tried to claim a life just hours before. The jungle, still damp from the night's wrath, glistened under the golden morning sun. Birds chirped hesitantly, testing the silence. After nature's fury, nestled at the edge of this untamed wilderness was a small village, a humble collection of mud and thatch huts arranged in a rough semicircle. Smoke curled lazily from cooking fires as women prepared the morning meal. Children, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in the night, ran barefoot through the damp earth, their laughter ringing through the air. But not everyone was at peace. Mother stood outside her hut, her eyes frantic, her lips trembling, a mother's worst nightmare. Naya clutched the edges of her shawl as she paced outside her hut, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the morning sounds around her. Her baby, her little Jabari, was gone. She had woken just before dawn, a strange stillness pulling her from sleep. Her arms, which had held her child close, were empty. At first, she thought she had simply shifted in her sleep, but when she reached out in the dim light, her fingers touched nothing but the cool, vacant space where her baby had been. Panic had struck like lightning. She tore through her small hut, lifting blankets, overturning baskets, her breath coming in short gasps. The door slightly ajar. Her pulse quickened. Had someone taken him? She rushed outside, calling his name, her voice raw with desperation. "Jabari! Jabari!" Villagers gathered, concern etching their faces. The chief, an elderly man with a strong presence, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Nia," he said gently, "we will find him." But his eyes, wise and knowing, held a shadow of doubt. A child so small, lost in the wilderness overnight? No one dared voice their fears. The jungle was a cruel and unforgiving place. If the river hadn't taken the child, something else would have. The king's burden, not far from the village, hidden beneath the thick foliage of an acacia tree. Asani watched. His powerful frame remained still, his golden eyes fixed on the sleeping infant nestled safely beneath him. Jabari had survived the night, cocooned in the warmth of the lion's thick mane. The great beast had stood guard all night, his ears twitching at every rustle in the underbrush, every distant growl of nocturnal hunters. Instinct had told him to leave the child in the safety of the grass, but something stronger, something unexplainable, had kept him close. The child had clung to him, his tiny fingers grasping at the lion's fur in his sleep. It was a touch that should have meant nothing, but it did. The sun's warmth grew, and Asani knew he could not keep the baby much longer. The village was not far. He could hear the distant murmurs, the calls of humans searching. It was time. With The gentleness of a creature that had no reason to be gentle. Asani picked up the child once more, careful not to let his teeth press too firmly, and then, like a shadow moving through the morning mist, he walked toward the village. The arrival that stopped hearts. The villagers had begun to split into search groups when a young boy standing at the village's edge froze in terror. A shape emerged from the jungle, large, golden, and unmistakably deadly. Lion, he stammered, pointing toward the tree line. Every head turned. Gasps filled the air. Men instinctively reached for spears. Women clutched their children, pulling them behind huts. The village fell into absolute silence. Asani stood at the threshold between the wild and the world of men. His golden mane shimmered in the sunlight, his massive paws sinking into the damp earth, and in his jaws a tiny bundle. For a moment no one moved. Then Nia screamed, "Jabari!" Ignoring all reason, all fear, she bolted forward. Gasps of horror echoed behind her. "No! Stop! He'll kill you!" someone shouted, but she did not stop, because that was her baby. Tears blurred her vision, her heart pounding as she ran straight toward the lion, toward the very thing that should have been her child's executioner. Asani did not move. He stood tall, his golden eyes calm, unreadable. And then, in an act that no human could have ever predicted, he gently placed the baby on the ground. For a second, no one dared breathe. Then, a wail, a tiny, beautiful cry of life. Nia collapsed to her knees, scooping her baby into her arms, sobbing as she held him close. He was warm, safe, alive, and the lion, the king of the jungle, simply turned and walked away. No hunger in his eyes. No malice in his step, just a quiet departure, as if he had merely returned something that had always belonged to them. And then he was gone. A village transformed. The moment stretched endlessly, the villagers still frozen in shock. A lion had entered their village and left without a drop of blood spilled. This was not just an animal, it was a guardian. Whispers began. Fear mixed with awe. Some dropped to their knees, whispering prayers to the spirits of the land. Others wept, unable to comprehend the miracle they had just witnessed. And Nia, holding her son close, his tiny body warm against hers, knew one thing. She would never forget the golden eyes that had looked at her child, not as prey, but as something worth saving, something worth protecting. And deep in the jungle, where the wild still ruled, Asani walked through the morning mist, unchanged, uncelebrated, but a king nonetheless, a shadow over the village. The village should have been celebrating. Jabari was safe. A miracle had occurred before their very eyes. A lion, the feared king of the jungle, had not only spared a child but delivered him back, unharmed. The elders whispered of old legends, of spirits that walked among beasts, of ancestors who guided the animals in ways no human could understand. But fear still lurked in the hearts of many, because what had happened defied everything they knew. And when something defies understanding, it is either worshipped or feared. As the sun dipped below, the treetops and the sky burned orange. The village council gathered in the center of the settlement. The chief sat cross-legged on a wooden stool, his weathered face unreadable. The village's strongest hunters stood beside him, gripping their spears tightly. Then an elder spoke. "A lion that does not kill is unnatural." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Another elder, a woman with deep lines of wisdom on her face, shook her head. "Unnatural or sacred," she countered. "Have we not heard stories of the great spirits taking form in beasts? What if this lion was sent to test us, or to trick us?" one of the hunters muttered darkly. "What if he comes back? What if next time he does not bring a child, but takes one?" A heavy silence fell. The chief exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the faces of his people. He had seen many things in his long life, but never a beast behaving like this. His heart wavered between wonder and unease. Then, in a low, measured voice, he made his decision. We will not hunt the lion, but we will watch him. If he comes too close again. He let the unspoken words hang in the air. The meaning was clear. The lion would not be given another chance. Deep in the jungle, a change begins far from the human settlement. Beneath the canopy of the great acacia trees, Asani prowled, his massive, her paws pressed silently into the damp earth, his muscles rippling with each step. The scent of the child still lingered in his nostrils, unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. He did not understand why he had acted the way he did. Instinct had told him to walk away, but something stronger, something ancient had rooted him in place, and now something had shifted within him. Lions were rulers of the wild, feared, respected, untouchable. But for the first time in his life, Asani felt something else. He felt watched. The jungle was never silent, but tonight there was a new presence, a new scent that made his hackles rise. It was the scent of men, hunters, the hunters. Two men crouched low behind a fallen tree, their bodies still as stone. They had followed the lion's tracks for miles, moving like shadows through the underbrush. Kato, the younger of the two, tightened his grip on his spear. "Are we really doing this?" he whispered. "The chief said we would only watch." His companion, a seasoned hunter named Tembo, did not take his eyes off the lion. "We watch until it is too late, and then a child goes missing forever," he muttered. "This is no ordinary lion. He is too close to humans. And when a beast forgets his place, it must be reminded." Kato hesitated. He had seen the lion that morning. He had seen its golden eyes, seen the way it had looked at the baby, not with hunger, but with something else, something deeper. But he also knew that fear ruled men's hearts, and fear led to action. Tembo pulled back his spear, aiming for the lion's flank. One throw, one strike, that was all it would take. But then a branch snapped behind them. Both hunters froze. The jungle, which had been filled with the distant cries of birds and insects, fell into an unnatural silence. Something else was here, something big. Kato turned his head slowly, his breath catching in his throat, and then the night exploded. An unexpected attack, a blur of black and gold, lunged from the shadows. It was fast, too fast. Tembo barely had time to let out a cry before fangs sank into his shoulder, pulling him down with crushing force. A leopard, a massive male, its golden eyes flashing with territorial rage. Kato scrambled backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. They had been so focused on the lion, they hadn't noticed the real predator. Tembo screamed, his spear falling uselessly to the ground as the leopard clamped down harder. For a hunter, there was no worse fate than being hunted. But before death could come, a second blur shot forward. Not the leopard, the lion. Asani roared, a sound so deep and earth-shaking that the very trees seemed to tremble. He collided with the leopard, his massive body slamming into the spotted beast, sending it rolling through the underbrush. For a moment, both great cats stared at each other, their muscles tensed, their breaths heavy. And then, with a low, guttural snarl, the leopard fled, gone as swiftly as it had come. Tembo collapsed, gasping, his arms slick with blood. Kato, still trembling, turned his wide eyes to the lion standing before them. Asani did not move. He did not chase the leopard. He did not attack the hunters. He only stood there, silent, watching, and then, as if deciding they were no longer his concern, he turned and disappeared into the jungle. A debt that cannot be repaid. Kato staggered forward, pressing his hands against Tembo's wound. The older hunter coughed, his face pale, his body weak. If the lion had not intervened, he would be dead. Kato swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he reached for the spear Tembo had dropped. He turned to the jungle, toward the path where the lion had disappeared. He could still kill it. He could still return to the village and say, It was a beast. We did what had to be done. But his grip loosened. His chest ached with something he could not name. A lion was supposed to kill, but this one saved. His mother's words came back to him, words he had dismissed earlier. Unnatural or sacred? He made his decision. Gripping Tembo's arm, he pulled the wounded man up and began the slow walk back to the village. They had set out to hunt a lion. Instead, the lion had saved them, and nothing would ever be the same again. A village in conflict. The village had seen many things, droughts, storms, even the occasional rogue beast. But never had they faced a question like this. A lion had saved two men. A lion had saved a child. Yet, the hunters had gone into the jungle to kill him. The moment Cato and Tembo returned, bloodied but alive, the village erupted in debate. The elders sat in a circle, their faces lined with worry. Some still whispered of spirits, some feared curses, and others, those who had lost family to wild beasts, wanted vengeance. A lion does not save men. This is a trick. One day we will wake to find a child missing. Then why did it save them? Why did it not finish Tembo when he was weak? Because it is waiting until we trust it. The village chief, silent until now, stood and raised his hand. Enough. His deep voice cut through the argument. We do not know what this means, but we will not act in ignorance. We will watch, and if the lion comes again. He did not finish his sentence. Everyone knew what he meant, and so the village waited. A silent guardian in the shadows far from the village, beneath the moonlit canopy of trees, Asani lay stretched against the earth, his body rising and falling with each slow breath. He was strong, powerful, feared, and yet something inside him had shifted. The scents of the jungle, the musk of antelope, the lingering trace of the leopard were familiar, but the scent of humans was new, and for the first time in his life he did not fear it. Instead, he watched. The village sat at the edge of the wild, its huts glowing faintly with firelight. And just beyond those flickering lights, he stayed, not hunting, not stalking, just watching. A child's boldness. Jabari was too young to understand fear the way adults did. He had been told to stay inside. His mother had whispered to him about the lion, the one that had saved him, the one that might come back. But Jabari was curious, and so one evening, just as the sun dipped below the trees, he wandered past the village border. His tiny footsteps barely made a sound against the dirt. His heart pounded with excitement. He wanted to see him, the great lion. And then, just beyond the last hut, at the edge of the jungle's embrace, he saw golden eyes staring back at him. Jabari gasped, but he did not scream, he did not run. The lion's massive body was barely visible in the dim light, but he was there, unmoving, watching. Jabari's small hands trembled, not with fear, but with something else. Recognition. Slowly, so slowly, he took a step forward, then another, and another. The lion did not move. Jabari reached out his tiny hand, and then, "Jabari!" A voice rang through the air, sharp and filled with panic. Jabari turned just in time to see his mother rushing toward him. The village erupted in cries of terror. "The lion is here! Get back! Get the weapons!" A hunter raised his spear, and Asani, sensing the shift in energy, vanished into the jungle. But the child had seen him, and in those brief moments, before the lion disappeared, something had passed between them. Not words, not gestures, something deeper, a bond, a beginning. A village on Edgefear had taken root. That night the village gathered once more, but this time there was no debate. The chief's face was dark with worry. He was too close. His voice was low. "We cannot allow this to continue." The decision was swift. By morning, the hunters would track the lion, and this time they would not return until the beast was dead. A hunt unlike any other. The hunters moved at dawn, armed with spears and bows. This was not a hunt for food. This was a hunt for survival. They followed the tracks deep into the jungle, the undergrowth whispering around them. Hours passed. The sun rose high. And then they found him. Asani stood in the clearing, his golden fur catching the light, his muscles tense but calm. He did not run, he did not roar, he only watched. A spear was drawn back, ready to strike, and then a cry shattered the air. "Stop! Jabari!" The child had followed them. His small body stumbled into the clearing, his arms outstretched. The hunters froze. Asani's ears pricked forward, his tail flicking. Jabari turned, his wide eyes pleading. "Please," he whispered. "He saved me. He saved Tembo. He's not bad." The hunters hesitated. The moment stretched, a heartbeat between life and death, and then an even greater threat arrived. A predator in the dark, a low growl rumbled through the trees. A shadow moved, and from the underbrush, another beast emerged. Not a lion, a pack of hyenas. 5 of them, their eyes gleaming with hunger. They had been following the hunters, waiting, and now they saw their chance. Jabari was too far from the hunters, too close to the open clearing, a perfect target. The largest hyena licked its lips and lunged. The lion's choice, everything happened in a flash. Jabari barely had time to scream before a golden blur intercepted the attack. Asani. He slammed into the hyena, his massive paw sending it sprawling. The rest of the pack hesitated, but only for a moment. Then they charged, and Asani fought. Teeth flashed, claws ripped. Blood sprayed across the dirt. A deep, earth-shaking roar erupted from the lion's throat, and one by one the hyenas fell back, bruised, bloodied, defeated. Asani stood over Jabari, his breaths ragged, his golden fur streaked with wounds. The child was untouched. The hunters could only stare, because for the 3rd time, the lion had saved them. A village forever changed. By the time they returned, the village was waiting. Jabari ran into his mother's arms. The hunters carried no trophies, no victory cries, only understanding. The lion had chosen not to kill. He had chosen to protect, and the village could no longer ignore it. The chief looked out at his people, his gaze lingering on the hunters, on the child, and finally on the jungle itself. Then, in a voice both strong and filled with awe, he spoke. "No one will raise a weapon against the lion again." The words rang in the air, heavy with meaning. The lion was no longer their enemy. He was their guardian. And from that day forward, Asani was no longer just a beast. He was legend, whispers of doubt despite. The chief's decree that no one would raise a weapon against Asani again. Not everyone in the village felt safe. Some still saw him as a beast. Others feared what they could not understand. And a few, a dangerous few, believed that allowing the lion to live was a mistake. One of them was Mosi, a seasoned hunter. Mosi had lost his father to a lion attack many years ago. Though he had been just a child, the memory of his father's torn body, the roars that had filled the air, never left him. And now, his people were calling this lion a guardian. He couldn't accept it. Late one night, as the village slept, Mosi sharpened his spear. The glow of the fire reflected off his hardened face. A lion is still a lion. He would not let the village make this mistake. The bond between boy and beast, while doubt festered in some, trust blossomed in others. Jabari, more than anyone, felt a deep connection to Asani. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, the boy would wander just beyond the village huts, and there in the shadows the lion would be waiting. Not hunting, not stalking, just watching. At first, Jabari would only wave. Then he started speaking. "Are you hungry?" he asked one evening, tossing a scrap of dried meat toward Asani. The lion sniffed it but did not eat. Jabari laughed. I don't think you like that." The next day he tried again, this time with fresh goat meat he had stolen from his mother's kitchen. Asani sniffed, then, ever so slowly, he ate. Day by day, their trust grew. Jabari would tell Asani stories, whispering about his dreams of becoming a great warrior, and Asani would listen. No growls, no roars, just understanding, but not everyone was pleased. Mosey watched from the shadows, his eyes narrowing. "This is wrong," he muttered to himself. Something had to be done. The betrayal. One night, while the village slept, Mosey took his spear and slipped into the jungle. He moved like a shadow, his breath steady, his grip tight. He had tracked lions before, and he knew if the village wouldn't kill Asani, he would do it himself. The lion was where he always was, resting at the jungle's edge. Mosey raised his spear. He took aim. And then a voice rang through the darkness. "Stop, Jabari!" The boy had followed him. Mosey's heart pounded. "This is a mistake, child," he hissed. "He is a beast. You cannot trust him." Jabari stepped between Mosey and Asani, his small arms spread wide. "He saved us. He saved me." Mosey hesitated. But then, in the distance, a chilling sound shattered the night. Screams. A new threat emerges. The village was under attack, not by lions, by men. The raiders arrive. The air was thick with smoke. Torches blazed in the night as a group of raiders stormed into the village. They were ruthless men, bandits from a faraway land known for pillaging villages and leaving only ruin behind. Huts burned. Women and children screamed. The men fought back, but they were outnumbered. The chief, though old, wielded his staff with power, but even he knew they were losing. Mosey's choice. Jabari and Mosey stood frozen at the jungle's edge, watching the horror unfold. Mosey gritted his teeth. He had spent his whole life hunting beasts, but tonight the true beasts were men. The boy turned to him, eyes wide with desperation. "We need Asani." Mosey hesitated. His entire life had been built around one belief, that lions were killers. But then he looked at Jabari, and for the first time, he listened. Mosey turned toward Asani, who stood tall, his golden fur reflecting the firelight. "Go," Mosey whispered. Jabari took a step closer to Asani, his small hands trembling. "Please," he whispered. And then the lion moved. The king awakens with a thunderous roar. Asani charged. He tore through the flames, his massive paws kicking up dust. The raiders turned, their faces twisting in shock. "A lion? Here?" The first man barely had time to raise his sword before Asani pounced. Chaos erupted. The village men, emboldened by the lion's ferocity, fought back with renewed strength. The chief swung his staff, knocking a raider to the ground. Mosey, finally breaking free from his past, grabbed his spear and joined the fight. And Jabari? He ran to his mother, pulling her from the wreckage of their burning hut. One by one, the raiders fell. The survivors, terrified and broken, fled into the jungle. The village was saved, and at the heart of it all stood Asani, breathing heavy, bloodied, but victorious, a lion's reward as the sun rose. The village gathered in the aftermath of the battle. They had lost much. Homes were destroyed, lives were shaken, but they had survived, and the reason stood before them, golden and proud. The chief stepped forward. He had seen many things in his life, but never this. The village had been wrong. The lion was not their enemy. He was their protector. And so, with the eyes of the village upon him, the chief knelt before Asani. In gratitude, the great lion let out a slow breath, his golden eyes meeting the old man's, and then he turned and walked away. Back into the jungle. Back to his home, but from that day forward, the village was never afraid again, because they knew somewhere just beyond the trees their guardians still watched, and if danger ever came again, The lion would return. The village stood in silence. The battle was over, but the echoes of the night still lingered in the air, the scent of smoke, the remnants of fear in their hearts, the realization that everything had changed. Jabari's mother clutched him tightly, tears streaming down her face. The chief, his once steady hands trembling, surveyed the ruins of their home. Mosi, the hunter who had once sworn to slay the lion, stood staring at the edge of the jungle where Asani had disappeared. No one spoke, because deep down they all knew they had witnessed something that would be told for generations. A lion had saved them, not because he had to, but because he chose to. The story. Spread's days passed, then weeks. The village slowly rebuilt itself, stronger than before. The raiders never returned. Word had spread of what had happened that night. Who would dare attack a village protected by a lion? Travelers from distant lands arrived, eager to hear the tale. Elders would sit by the fire, their voices carrying through the night. There was once a lion, mighty and golden, who defied all expectations. A beast who chose to protect instead of hunt. A guardian who stood where no man dared, and when danger came, he fought, not as an enemy, but as a brother. Children listened wide-eyed, gripping their blankets, dreaming of the great Asani. And Jabari. He grew, he became a warrior, not one of strength alone, but of wisdom. He never forgot the lion who had saved his life. And every evening he would stand at the jungle's edge, hoping, just once, to see those golden eyes watching back. One night, under the glow of a full moon, Jabari ventured beyond the village. The jungle was silent. He placed a hand over his heart and whispered, "Asani." For a long time, there was nothing then. A rustle, a shadow shifting in the trees, and there, in the darkness, two golden eyes met his. Jabari smiled. No words were needed. He turned and walked away, knowing that no matter how many years passed, the lion would always be there, watching, protecting, their guardian, their legend, their king. The story of Asani teaches us that courage is not defined by strength, but by the choices we make. It reminds us that bonds can form in the most unexpected ways, that trust can overcome fear, and that even the wildest of hearts can be filled with kindness. In a world where lines are often drawn between man and beast, this story asks an important question. What if, instead of fearing the unknown, we chose to understand it, and perhaps, just perhaps, we would find something incredible waiting on the other side?